They laughed when she signed up. A 13-year-old girl from a trailer park. No mic, no music, no vocal training. Just a name scribbled on the school talent show list. Kids filmed her from the back of the classroom, whispering, "She's going." To humiliate herself. Teachers exchanged polite glances, bracing for second-hand embarrassment. The night of the show, she walked barefoot onto that stage, hair messy, dress second-hand, eyes trembling. And then she opened her mouth. Silence. Not the polite kind, the breath-held, heart-strangled kind. One verse in, and you could hear kids putting down their phones. 2 verses, and even the parents who had rolled their eyes earlier were gripping their seats. 4 verses, and the gymnasium was on its feet crying. That's not an exaggeration. That's a warning. Don't blink or you'll miss the moment everything turns. Because in that crowd was a world-renowned conductor. He didn't clap. He stared. And what he said to her after, in the wings, under the hum of a dying spotlight, would rewrite the rest of her life. This is not a story about singing. It's a story about power. The kind they tried to laugh out of her. The kind that makes entire rooms fall silent. The kind that comes from pain and stays because it's real. If you've ever been underestimated, watch till the end. If someone told you you're not enough, comment still standing, because what happened after this moment no one saw coming. It begins in silence, not the kind that feels safe, not the hush of morning coffee or the pause between turning pages. No, this was the kind of silence that seeps in through the cracks in your windows, the kind that hums under poverty, shame, and things unspoken. In the fading light of Oklahoma's flatlands, where even the wind seemed to sigh with exhaustion, there stood a faded blue trailer with chipped siding and rust along the seams. It wasn't much, but to Lily Harper and her mother, Maria, it was home. Lily was 13 and carried herself like someone older, like a girl who had already learned not to speak too loudly, not to ask for too much. She moved through the world quietly. Small shoulders, soft eyes, hair that fell into her face like a curtain drawn against the world. In school, she barely raised her hand. She sat in the back of class, kept her lunch in brown paper bags, and listened more than she spoke. But when she was alone, something shifted. Her voice, the one no one really heard, would come alive in whispers and hums, filling their tiny trailer with a kind of aching beauty. She sang not because someone taught her to, but because the silence had to break somewhere. Maria heard it, of course. Always after her second shift, when her feet ached from standing 12 hours, she would stop by the door and just listen. No piano, no microphone, just Lily, singing quietly into the dark, the words old and the notes imperfect, but real. So incredibly real. The day Lily signed up for the school talent show, she didn't tell her mom. Not because she wanted to surprise her, but because she was afraid she'd disappoint her. She signed her name in trembling letters, unnoticed at first, until someone, a boy in gym class, caught sight of it. "Lily Harper?" He laughed. "She's gonna sing?" Laughter spread like a spark across dry grass. Phones were pulled. Doodly TikToks were filmed. "Get ready for the train wreck," someone muttered in the hallway. No one asked her what she would sing. No one cared. The days leading up to the performance felt like walking with stones in her shoes. Every conversation stopped when she entered a room. Someone slid a fake flyer into her locker that read, "World's Worst Voice Coming Soon." She threw it away without a word. At home, she practiced. Not with scales or sheet music, but with feeling. She sang while washing dishes, while folding the same 3 outfits she owned, while watching the light flicker through the trailer's cracked window. Her voice was never loud, but it had weight. Like it had seen things, even at 13. Like it had lived in her bones long before she was born. The night of the talent show, Maria ironed her daughter's only dress. Pale yellow, hand-me-down, with a small tear near the hem. She kissed her on the forehead and whispered, "Let them hear your truth." At the auditorium, Lily waited behind the curtain. One hand clutched the edge of her dress. Her name was called. The room was filled with laughter and the echo of snack bags being crinkled open. She stepped into the light, and for the briefest moment, a heartbeat, a blink, she wished she could disappear. But then she took a breath, and the silence began. Again, not cruel this time, different. Something was about to happen, something no one, not even Lily, was ready for. At first, they didn't even look up. The auditorium was humming with the usual disinterest reserved for middle school performances. Heads down, whispers weaving through the air, fingers busy texting under tables. Someone in the front row chuckled under their breath. A teacher, trying to be discreet, adjusted her seat as if preparing to endure something mildly painful. Lily stood there, alone under the harsh glow of the spotlight. The pale yellow dress shimmered slightly, trembling with her. Her hands were clenched at her sides, knuckles white, heart slamming against her ribs. She looked out into the crowd in a blur of faces and shadows. She didn't know where to begin. So she closed her eyes and began without music. One note. Soft. Barely more than breath. It wavered. Someone coughed, but she kept going. The next note rose a little higher, steadier. A melody old and trembling with memory. A folk hymn her mother used to hum while washing dishes. Her voice, untrained, held nothing fancy. It cracked in places, hovered dangerously off pitch in others, but behind every word was something else, something raw. You could almost feel it crawling up from her stomach, clawing past every bruise she never told anyone about, every time she was told she didn't belong, every night she lay awake listening to her mother cry quietly behind the wall. And slowly, without anyone realizing it, the noise began to fade. The whispering stopped. Someone, a boy in the second row who had filmed 3 other acts for TikTok, lowered his phone. Not out of kindness, out of confusion, out of something unfamiliar clawing its way up his throat. Lily's voice grew stronger, not louder, never loud, but deeper, like the sound of a church with no roof, rain falling through as a prayer is. Dung anyway. You could hear the Oklahoma dust in her vowels, the hunger in her pauses. You could hear how long she'd waited to be allowed to speak, and by the time she hit the final note, held just a beat too long, trembling just enough to make it feel like it might fall apart. No one moved, not a foot shifted, not a candy wrapper rustled, just air, thick with something electric. Then a single clap, and then another. Then all at once the room erupted. People rose to their feet, some too quickly to understand why. A teacher clutched her chest. A boy who had laughed earlier stood frozen, mouth open. Phones were raised, this time not to mock but to capture something unrepeatable. Backstage, Lily stood there, blinking. She hadn't expected silence. She certainly hadn't expected this. She turned just in time to see someone walking toward her from the wings. An older man in a navy coat, silver hair swept back like waves against a storm. He didn't smile. He didn't rush. He simply looked at her like he'd seen something he hadn't seen in a very, very long time. "I'm Julian Bennett," he said quietly, extending a hand. "I conduct the New York Youth Philharmonic. I was visiting. For old times." Lily stared, unsure what to do. "That," he said, motioning back toward the stage, "was something no one can teach. Would you consider auditioning for our summer program? We provide full scholarships for students with undeniable voices." Maria was called from work. She rushed to the school in her apron, still dusted with flour from the diner. When she found Lily, her daughter's face was lit from within, as if the spotlight had never really turned off. And when she heard what had happened, she didn't say anything. She just pulled Lily close, closed her eyes, and held on like the world was about to change. Because it was. But not in the way either of them expected. Not yet. Because before the stage in New York, before the standing ovations, the scholarships, the late-night rehearsals in echoing halls, there would be tests. There would be resistance. There would be a summer that would stretch her to the edge of who she believed she was. But right now, in that small-town gymnasium, under flickering lights and the warm applause of people who had never seen her before, Lily Harper had done the impossible. She had made them feel something, and that, more than any perfect note, was the beginning. New York wasn't a city, it was an avalanche. The moment Lily and Maria stepped off the bus, the world shifted. The air smelled of iron and motion. Everything was louder, faster, hungrier. Skyscrapers leaned in like they were listening, waiting to see if she would break. In Tulsa, Lily had been invisible. In New York, she was small, but no longer hidden. The New York Academy of Music's summer program lived inside a red brick fortress nestled between glass towers. Its gates were heavy, so were the stairs. Students from all over the world gathered there, children of composers, diplomats, violin prodigies who had played Carnegie Hall before they lost their baby teeth. They came with tailored clothes, leather-bound portfolios, resumes that sounded like fairy tales. And then there was Lily, with one suitcase, second-hand jeans, and no sheet music. The first morning, the contrast hit like a slap. She sat in the orientation room, a sea of confidence. Around her, a girl with high cheekbones and an Italian accent asked her who her vocal coach was. "I don't have one," Lily whispered. The girl blinked. "Oh, wow, bold." In the choral placement audition, she stood beside boys with perfect pitch and girls who could read music like novels. When it was her turn, she opened her mouth and hesitated. The room stared, unblinking. She sang anyway. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't polished. It wasn't what they expected. When the results came out, she was placed in the lowest ensemble, the group usually reserved for developmental students, the ones with potential, they said. The word stung. It always stung. Rehearsals were brutal. The conductor of her ensemble, a woman named Dr. Monroe, was meticulous and cold. Every missed note, every hesitation was pointed out. Not with cruelty, but with a clinical detachment that made Lily feel like a broken instrument. "You sing with feeling," Dr. Monroe said once after a solo run-through. "But feeling, without form, is just noise." Lily nodded, heart sinking. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't quite catch up. Music theory was like a foreign language. Sight reading felt like drowning in symbols. And the other students, they noticed. One afternoon after rehearsal, Lily overheard two boys from the chamber choir snickering. "She's got a nice story," one said. "Trailer park girl with the big voice. Feels very Hallmark." "She'll be gone by next year," the other replied. "Emotion doesn't win scholarships. Technique does." Lily walked past them without a word. But that night in her dorm room, she lay awake for hours. The city buzzed outside the window, neon leaking through the blinds. She missed home, the softness of her mother's voice, the slow Oklahoma sunsets, the sound of train horns in the distance. But more than that, she missed believing she was enough. The next morning, she almost didn't go to rehearsal. Almost. But something in her, something older than pride, pushed her out the door. And that evening, after the rest of the academy had gone quiet, she found an empty practice room at the end of the West Wing. The piano was out of tune, the walls were cracked, but it was hers, no eyes, no judgment, just air and space. She sang, not what was on the syllabus, not the Latin choral piece or the Mozart aria. She sang what she knew, a song she and her mother used to hum during thunderstorms. Her voice was softer here, not because she was hiding, but because she wasn't trying to be anything else. The walls didn't demand perfection. They absorbed her. What she didn't know, what she couldn't see, was that she wasn't alone. Outside the room, Julian Bennett had paused on his way to the faculty lounge. He stood, one hand resting on the doorframe, as the sound drifted. Out, weathered, yearning, bare. He didn't interrupt. The next day, he requested she join a special mentorship ensemble. It was unofficial, off the books, but it meant access to him, to guidance, to belief. At first, the other students whispered, "She's getting special treatment. She's the project. She's his charity case." But then came the faculty showcase, an evening performance attended by sponsors, alumni, and journalists. Every student performed in groups, save one solo slot, the closing piece. They gave it to Lily. There was grumbling, obvious discontent. But Maestro Bennett stood by his decision. That night, in a hall gilded with chandeliers with cell phones ready to record her stumble, Lily stepped forward. She didn't wear anything flashy, just a simple dress, no jewelry, no stage makeup. She stood in the center, took a breath and let it all go. The music wasn't perfect, but her voice, that voice, poured through the silence like warm rain. She sang not at the audience, but to them. Each note carried a story, a breath, a bruise. It was unfiltered, undeniable. And when the last note fell, a soft, breaking sigh, there was no applause, not at first, just stillness. Then it hit. The wave. The crowd rose, slowly but completely. Standing ovation. One critic tweeted, "She sings like someone who's lost everything and found something even better." That night, Lily didn't cry. She walked back to her dorm in silence, looked up at the New York sky, dark, heavy with stars she could barely see, and whispered, "I'm still here." The next morning, everything was different. She woke up the same pillow, same cracked ceiling above her. But something had shifted in the air around her. In the hallway, people didn't look through her anymore. Some even nodded. A few smiled. One girl, the Italian soprano from orientation, paused at her door. "You made us all feel something last night," she said simply. "We needed that." It wasn't admiration. Not yet. But it wasn't pity either. It was the beginning of something else, respect maybe. The quiet kind, earned not through brilliance but through honesty. At breakfast, Maestro Bennett sat beside her with his coffee. "There are singers here who've spent their lives perfecting how to sound like a bell," he said. "But you sound like a life." She didn't know what to say, so she just smiled and stirred her oatmeal, pretending not to shake. By week 6, the buzz had reached the dean's office. An impromptu audition was arranged, unofficial, discreet. Just a handful of faculty, a few scholarship board members, and an alumna donor who'd flown in after watching a clip of Lily's performance on YouTube. Maria was flown in too. Maestro Bennett insisted. She arrived in the same black sneakers she wore at the diner, gripping her daughter's hand like it might float away. Her eyes scanned the ornate hallways with wonder and disbelief, pausing at every chandelier like they were stars fallen from heaven. "You belong here," she whispered to Lily outside the room. "No matter what happens next, you belong." Inside, Lily didn't wear a costume. No trained smile, no pretense. She sang a lullaby in Spanish, one Maria used to hum on the nights they didn't have enough food for dinner. She sang it gently, like she was afraid to wake something. Each note was a memory braided into melody. The sound of rain on the trailer roof, the warmth of her mother's arms, the cold sting of being laughed at, and the quiet power of singing. Anyway, when it ended, the room stayed still. Then the donor, a sharp-eyed woman with a voice like velvet, turned to the dean and said, "If you let this girl go, you've forgotten why music exists." The full scholarship came with a letter handwritten by the board. It didn't say much, just that her voice had reminded them of what they didn't say. But Lily understood. They had been reminded of truth, of what music sounds like when it isn't polished to impress but offered to heal. Maria cried when she read it, not out of pride, but out of release. All those years of scraping, surviving, praying that the world would see what she had always known, that her daughter wasn't small. She was just waiting for a room big enough to echo her voice back. They moved into a tiny apartment on the Upper West Side. Nothing fancy, but it had windows that opened to the city and a kettle that whistled when it boiled, a sound that somehow made everything feel real. Lily began the fall term with nerves still coiled inside her. The program was rigorous. There were days she still felt out of place, surrounded by students who could read operas like picture books and discuss composers she'd never even heard of. But now she had tools. And she had Maestro Bennett, patient, demanding, fiercely protective of the way she told stories through song. One day, in vocal class, she was asked to perform a complex piece by Schubert. She tried. She stumbled. But then, instead of apologizing, like she used to, she said softly, "Can I try that again?" Not perfectly, just honestly. The instructor, a stern man who rarely smiled, looked at her for a long moment and then nodded. This time she didn't sing like she was chasing perfection. She sang like she was telling someone goodbye. When she finished, the room was silent, not out of judgment but reverence. That's when she knew she didn't need to sing like them. She needed to sing like her. And when she did, even the coldest rooms grew warm. The world didn't bow. It didn't suddenly open every door, but it listened. And that, for a girl who once whispered to the wind in a cracked trailer, was everything. Years passed the way years always do when they are full, slowly in the moment, but fast in memory. Lily Harper's name began to appear on posters, then on critics' lists, then in the hush that swept over a theater just before she walked. On stage, she toured, she recorded. She was asked to sing for presidents, for kings, for crowds that paid hundreds just to hear one note, her note, the one they couldn't explain, the one that felt like it remembered them. She never sang perfectly. And she never tried to, because that wasn't why they came. They came for what they couldn't name, for the ache, the truth, the way she made silence feel sacred. They came for the way she stood in stillness before the first note, as if she were listening for something inside herself. And when she sang, the world always stopped. But the moment that mattered most didn't happen on a world stage. It happened at a small benefit concert, a fundraiser she organized herself, to support young artists from overlooked communities. A stage built in a high school gymnasium, not so different from the one where it all began. Folding chairs, fluorescent lights, a microphone taped to an old stand. The final song was hers, a new composition, one she had never shared publicly. She didn't introduce it, didn't explain. She simply stepped forward and began. It was soft, gentle, a lullaby made of breath and longing, stitched with every memory she carried. The sound of wind against aluminum siding, the crack of train tracks at night, the voice of her mother singing in the kitchen, humming against the weight of bills and double shifts. The final lyric came like a whisper, "You stood alone so I could stand at all." And then silence, but not from her, from the crowd. No applause, not yet. Only one sound broke the quiet, the sound of a chair scraping back against the floor. And then, her, Maria, standing, hands pressed to her chest, eyes wide with tears, and, just like years ago, the room followed. One by one, people stood, not clapping, not filming, just standing, in reverence, in understanding, because they knew what this was. Not a song, a homecoming. Afterward, someone asked Lily what her proudest moment had been. Carnegie Hall. Her first gold record. She smiled and shook her head. "No," she said softly. "It was when my mom stood up. And perhaps that's what makes a life not just seen, but felt. Not the stages we reach, but the people who rise. For us when we need them most. Not the applause we earn, but the silence we hold, and who dares to break it in love." Lily never stopped singing, but she never forgot the dust, the trailer, the mockery, the broken piano keys of her childhood. She wore them quietly, like a hidden harmony under every note, and wherever she went, she carried the voice that once trembled on a middle school stage, barefoot, terrified, trembling, and turned that voice into something the world could not look away from, something it had to listen to, something it had to stand for. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, please share it. Someone out there might need it more than you know. And if you believe in stories that heal, that remind us of hope, of courage, of quiet strength, subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these voices keep singing, and maybe one day it will help someone else find theirs.